Atlantic. As promised, we will start on time. So as all our speakers are already connected, and we have also our audience joining. I'm Annelise Robin, Program Officer in the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. We are very pleased to see so many of you joining us today for this OSCE webinar for the launch of our latest publication, Applying Gender-Sensitive Approaches to Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. We have a large number of registered participants and more following us via the YouTube live stream. But before we start, my colleague Ignace will make a couple of housekeeping announcements. Ignace?
Thank you, Annelise, and good afternoon and good morning to all the panelists and the participants of today's event. I would like to, first of all, give a big shout out to Alina, our administrative assistant, as well as Simon and Oliver, who are running the show behind the scene. To all the panelists, if you have any technical issues, please don't hesitate to contact Alina, me, or any one of us in the chat, and we will assist you. Please know that you will also have an opportunity to share comments and resources in the chat, which I will be monitoring. The last part of this session will be dedicated to answering your questions. With that, I would kindly ask for all of those who would like to raise a question to any of the panelists. Please use the Q&A function, which is located in the bar at the bottom of your screen. This event will be held in English with interpretation in Russian, thanks to our interpreters, Oksana and Ksenia. The event will also be recorded in both languages so that it can be shared with those who are not able to attend today. I would also like to thank our communications colleagues, Lilia and Blanca, for their support in organizing this event. Thanks to them, you can follow this conversation on our CTHB Twitter account, and I will add the links in the chat below. Back to you, Annalise.
Thank you, Ignace. And without further ado, let me introduce you to our OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, Mr. Valiant Ritchie, and Val will deliver welcoming remarks.
Thanks so much, Annalise, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. It's a real pleasure to have you all join us today. I'm really excited about this paper and the work that Annalise and the other members of my team, like Ignace, have done on it. So it's just really exciting to have you all with us today. When it comes to the topic of gender and trafficking in human beings, we often hear, I think, throughout discussions around the world that trafficking is a gendered phenomenon. But what does that really mean, and what does it mean practically, and why does that matter? What's the significance to us as practitioners as we try to resolve the problem of trafficking in human beings? Boys, girls, men, and women are vulnerable to trafficking in human beings for different reasons and are affected in different ways. And combating trafficking in human beings with a gender-sensitive approach is therefore, I think, crucial to ensure that no victim is left behind, regardless of their gender or the form of exploitation they have endured. But the question remains, have we fully integrated these concepts, these different gendered needs and vulnerabilities into our policies and practices? And I think you're going to hear today that the answer is no, we have not. Although the Palermo Protocol and other international instruments require states to adopt and implement gender-sensitive approaches to combating trafficking, many gender aspects of this crime remain hidden and unaddressed in the existing counter-trafficking strategies. And that's why an event like this one today is so important. During this hour and a half, you're going to hear from a panel of 4 experts and a statement from our opening speaker in just a moment, who will share their insights into different aspects of the gender-sensitive approaches that are highlighted in our paper. But first, I really want to take a minute to highlight the focus and attention brought to this topic by the OSCE Chair in Office, Sweden. It really takes champions to advance this topic, and in this regard, Sweden has put tremendous momentum behind the issue of gender-sensitive approaches and gender equality and empowerment in the OSCE. In this regard, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Liliana Pelihovic, our opening speaker. Ms. Pelihovic is the special representative of the Swedish chair on gender. She's from Moldova and has been very active in promoting policies in the field of gender equality and civil society development. Just delighted to have you with us, Liliana. It's a great pleasure, and the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ricci. Distinguished participants, the special representative, Mr. Ricci, thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And I appreciate this initiative to conduct this analysis and to start the discussion on the which should be the strategies that countries should apply in order to combat trafficking of human beings by applying gender-sensitive approaches. My firm belief is that if all countries will apply gender-sensitive approaches to all dimensions of development, then we would certainly have less inequalities in our communities and more potent economies. And consequently, there will be less traffic risks for both women and men, and much more opportunities for all. All this is bound to happen only in one condition: when national decision makers will not forget that national public policies must be based on the analysis of the risks and vulnerabilities of both women and men, and respond accordingly to their needs. That being said, it is important also to know that we still cannot assess today sufficient political will at national level to implement all international commitments for ensuring gender equality. And it is well known that gender inequalities occurs because of lack of employment opportunities, coupled with discrimination and lack of access to education. When I'm speaking about the lack of education and discrimination, refers to both to women and men, and also to employment opportunities also refers to both to women and men living in different regions, areas, and in different vulnerable conditions. Another element important that generates traffic risks are also the persistent gender roles and stereotypes, which dictates a certain behavior of women and men in a society. And in a society where the rights of women are neglected and the inequalities are very, very pronounced, ideal conditions for human trafficking appears, especially trafficking of girls and women. And in society where women are exclusively responsible for upbringing of children, the employment opportunities are also severely limited, and thus women are mostly dependent on their husbands. And when this happens, certain vulnerabilities appears. And in case of divorce, in case of other difficult situations when women remains without any source of income, other risks for human trafficking appears. We have to analyze all these and to identify the proper solution for all types of situations that may appear in the life of a person. We have also to pay attention today during our discussions also to women or to people living in conflict affected regions, which are even much more vulnerable for trafficking human trafficking. Their families are often homeless, without income, do not have access to health services, to education, and in such conditions, women as usually are looking for alternative solution. In many cases, due to the low level of education, lack of information, women become an easy prey for human traffickers. For diminishing the risks of trafficking for both women and men, girls and boys, the identification of the various prevention mechanisms is of vital importance. By doing this, participating states will develop more efficient national prevention policies that will increase the level of security of women and men from different vulnerable groups. It is important to make the message very clear to everyone, especially to those who have the power of change to change the reality in which population lives. the structural barriers that further facilitate the gender-based discrimination and certain inequalities are generating a constant increase in the number of humans that are being trafficked, affecting both women and men of different ages. For stopping this cycle, we have to ensure the full access of women to job market, the access to qualitative education, including vocational education and training, eliminate all legislative barriers that are facilitating the dissemination of the discrimination of women in recruitment, ensure equal payment, and create an environment where men and women share their household and childcare responsibility. Finally, I would like to thank you, Office of the Special Representative for Prevention of Trafficking of Human Beings, for the initiative to conduct this analysis, and I am firmly convinced that this document will have a large impact in planning future interventions for preventing trafficking of human beings and strengthening the security of women and men in participating countries. And I really hope that all participating countries will take on board this document, will analyze the recommendation of this document, and will take into account when they will develop their national policies. We have in the, at least in the region where I live, we have difficult situation connected with trafficking in human beings. And we have to use the opportunities and to see how the OSCE, through the tools existing, may assist these countries to do better in combating the trafficking of human beings, also taking into account the specific risks that appears for women and men. Thank you, and I will follow the discussion today, and I will answer to the questions that will appear. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Liliana. It's really great to hear your perspective, and I appreciate in particular highlighting the persistent structural barriers that you were talking about that really perpetuate gender-based discrimination and inequalities that then fuel trafficking. I thought in particular your discussion about focusing on risk and trying to reduce risk and provide more opportunity. And then also the emphasis on political will, because of course that's going to be crucial at the end of the day. So thank you so much for those comments. So your kind words about the paper are an excellent segue into what is the paper all about? What's the content of the paper? And so for that, we're going to turn to Annalise for a presentation of the findings, and then we're going to have our panel discussion. So Annalise, take it away.
Thank you, Val. And while Ignace puts up the presentation, just want to say that we are indeed thrilled to share with you some insights from our paper, Applying Gender-Sensitive Approaches in Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. And if you haven't yet downloaded that publication, I invite you to click on the link posted in the chat. At the OSCE, participating states have adopted a number of specific commitments on gender and trafficking in human beings. And through those commitments, states recognize violence against women and discrimination based on sex among the contributing factors to trafficking. And they committed to implement gender-sensitive approaches while taking into account the particular needs of women, men, girls, and boys. However, as Val mentioned in his introductory remarks, many gender aspects of this crime remain hidden and unaddressed in the existing anti-trafficking strategies. Our research also showed that there's little guidance on what a gender-sensitive approach should entail. So our efforts focused on strengthening the understanding of the OSCE commitments related to victim-centered, trauma-informed, and gender-sensitive approaches that fully respects human rights and fundamental freedoms. With this publication, we offer insights into gaps of the current application of gender-sensitive approaches, and we suggest possible ways to better address gender-specific vulnerabilities and needs of victims of trafficking, including those who are oftentimes overlooked. The objective is to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the gender aspects of trafficking in human beings, In doing so, we hope we can help policymakers and practitioners better detect at-risk populations, address intersecting vulnerabilities, and identify the differential protection needs of all victims. It is also hoped that we can help develop tailored assistance mechanisms and a more effective criminal justice response. So to build the evidence, we carried out a multi-method research, including surveys, interviews, and expert group meetings involving participants from more than half of the OSCE's participating states. The project brought together the voices of survivors, anti-trafficking experts, service providers, and law enforcement to provide a broad account of gender aspects in combating trafficking in human beings. And the material was analyzed from the perspective of the 3Ps paradigm: prevention, protection, and prosecution. And before I move on to the presentation of the key findings, allow me a brief pause to thank all of those who contributed to this research, some of whom are attending the event today. And the list of contributors and peer reviewers is long, so I won't name each of you individually, but a big thank you for your collaboration on this project. In terms of findings, our evidence-based and survivor-informed research showed that gender-sensitive approaches in response to the crime of trafficking is still incomplete and fragmented. First, we noted that most policy reports and academic literature on gender and trafficking looked primarily at the sexual exploitation of women and girls. The lack of a comprehensive knowledge of gender-related aspects has limited our understanding of who potential victims might be and what their vulnerabilities and needs are. This might also contribute to overlooking the role of gender in the exploitation of men and women when they are not part of the most detected group of victims. And such examples include men and boys in sexual exploitation or women and girls in labor exploitation. The concept of ideal victim was highlighted throughout the research as a key contributor to the exclusion of groups of potential victims who are less visible, and as a consequence, the needs are not met. And if we look closer at the 3 pillars of the anti-trafficking framework, the research showed that gender-based discrimination and unequal social and economic opportunities are significant contributing factors to the trafficking of women and girls. Also, harmful notions of masculinity and patriarchal expectations towards work and gender negatively impact men and boys who traditionally play a breadwinner role. In addition, our research shed light on the importance of looking at intersecting factors such as age and ethnicity, and you will hear more on this during our panel discussion. When we turn to the protection efforts, we noted that gender also played a crucial role in the construction of the ideal victim profile. This explains why certain groups are more readily identified as victims than others. Victims of different genders are exploited in different ways and therefore have different needs, but victims who do not fit the stereotypical profile receive very little attention and are often subject to double victimization. Women and girls continue to lack access to specialized services. Also, men and boys and others who do not fit the ideal victim profile have a hard time accessing the protection system, and as a result of stereotypical constructions of masculinity. Overall, tailored assistance is scarce. Differential assistance that would take into account victims' gender-specific needs according to the type of harm and exploitation is extremely limited. In addition to that, trafficking victims often fall in the gray area between the categories of victim and offender, thus hindering identification and protection efforts. Finally, the research shed light on the role of gender in shaping the victim-trafficker relationships, and as well as in shaping the victim criminal justice interactions. Victim-trafficker relationships are often complex, as it may involve recruitment by family members, trauma bonding, romantic relationships, as well as violence, fear, and manipulation. Victims' interactions with criminal justice practitioners is also influenced by gender stereotypes, which may lead to maltreatment of victims. This includes inappropriate questioning and even sexual misconduct, as well as dismissal of victimization claims and denial of victimhood status. The study participants highlighted the limited gender awareness among criminal justice practitioners and the lack of sufficient education and training. The paper concludes with a series of recommendations that cover 4 areas. The first one is data collection and production of knowledge. Due to the constant shifts in the trends and patterns of trafficking, regular research on gender aspects of trafficking is needed, with an emphasis on under-researched areas of trafficking where victims do not fit the ideal victim profile. The second area is capacity building to address biases in the anti-trafficking response. It is indeed critical to strengthen victim-centered and gender-sensitive training of law enforcement and judicial professionals, as well as service providers. Third is the importance of needs-based interventions for underserved populations to support the identification of all victims, such as women in labor exploitation and men in sexual exploitation. The fourth and last area is awareness raising and youth education. There is a need to develop transformative strategies to tackle discriminatory stereotypes of masculinity and femininity and address the root causes of gender biases and discrimination and violence against women. To conclude, proper attention to these issues is key to the development of effective responses to trafficking, and failure to address these problem areas will lead to exacerbating stereotypes, hindering the provision of protection and assistance to all victims, but also the delivery of justice and prevention efforts. We look forward to engaging further with you in these key areas wherever our support is most needed. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annalise. It's really interesting to see the structure around the 3 Ps and the need to address this topic across prevention, protection, and prosecution. And in this regard, I'm really delighted to see such a diverse group of attendees today. We have representatives from the police, social service providers, other international organizations, academia, and so forth. I think this is representative of how this topic really cuts across all aspects of the anti-trafficking effort. So I think we're looking forward to continue to serve as a platform for supporting the efforts of states and their national authorities and civil society in their respective work in order to make the anti-trafficking effort more gender responsive. So with that, let's turn to our panel of experts who I'm really excited to hear from, because we've got a great group here today. And we're going to begin with Jerome Elam. And Jerome is the president and CEO of Trafficking in America Task Force. He's also a passionate writer, survivor leader, and member of ODIHR, which is one of the institutions for the OSC, ODIHR's International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Board. Jerome peer-reviewed the publication, which was a real honor for us. And I want to thank him for his contribution. That's just fantastic, Jerome. Speaking from the heart and with the insights as a survivor of child sexual abuse, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse imagery, he will now shed light on the importance of gender-sensitive anti-trafficking measures to break stereotypes and ensure tailored assistance for all victims, including men and boys in sexual exploitation. Jerome, it's a real honor to have you with us today, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm incredibly honored to be here today. This is such important and groundbreaking research. The role of gender in human trafficking is a topic that has for so long been misunderstood. Even though we have a general template for identifying victims of human trafficking, this research will allow us to apply a more refined approach to victim identification. Law enforcement has for so many years lacked the tools necessary to identify the expansive range of victim profiles. For example, male victims of human trafficking have been severely overlooked as victims of human trafficking, with so many being arrested for theft or other crimes, with no one ever noticing they are victims of human trafficking. Recent studies have shown that males are trafficked at significantly higher rates than previously known. The reason that they have long gone unnoticed is the impact of gender. Specifically, the male ego has imprisoned male victims in a cocoon of fear and shame. This year, during a conference in Africa, a 35-year-old man told me for the first time in his life they had been molested and trafficked at age 10. His story is unfortunately just one of so many others that victims all over the world have shared with me. This research will give law enforcement and so many others a lens to make sure that every victim has the chance to be identified and to find a comprehensive path to heal from their trauma. Once a victim has been identified, it is also imperative that we offer services that best fit their needs. This research will allow mental health professionals and other service providers to give the individualized care each victim needs and make sure that their recovery is facilitated at every step of the way. As a male survivor of child sex trafficking, I languished for 7 years as a victim with no one recognizing the signs. My escape came only as my life hung in the balance in an emergency room, and a nurse had the knowledge to recognize my abuse and the courage to fight for me to receive the help that I so desperately needed. Along the path of my life, the knowledge that is being shared today could have given those around me the ability to recognize that I was being trafficked in plain sight and so desperately needed help. Today, I hope we're starting a new chapter. This research is going to give us the lens that we need and the tools to share with the world to make sure that not one more victim suffers as I have and not one more child is left behind. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm truly honored.
Thanks so much, Jerome. It's really great to hear you talk about the role that this plays in victim identification, and particularly how much it means to those victims who are often overlooked to have that attention that they need. That's really, I think that's crucial. That lies at the core of everything that this. Thank you so much for your words. Our next speaker is Yasmin Vafa. She is a human rights attorney and advocate, as well as the co-founder and executive director of Rights for Girls. I've known Yasmin for many years now, and I think it was actually Yasmin who helped me really first kind of wrap my mind around the idea of intersectionality as it applies to trafficking. I'm very grateful for that. She's a really knowledgeable expert in this field. She's had great success in advocating for several laws in the United States that helped ensure that the rights of marginalized women and girls, especially those of ethnic and racial minorities, are protected. And in fact, Yasmin will highlight for us the need to apply an intersectional approach in developing prevention strategies for women and girls. And she's going to discuss how gender-based inequalities and stereotypes affect the development of prevention strategies against trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Yasmin, it's a great pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you to speak on such an important topic. As a human rights attorney working to end gender-based violence, my work is primarily focused on elevating the voices and needs of our most marginalized girls through policy advocacy, research, training, and coalition building. Though my work and expertise is focused on sex trafficking in the United States, I think much of what I will share about the importance of an intersectional approach to human trafficking should resonate with other states and jurisdictions. In recent years, through better data collection and coordination with survivors, we have come to learn that the majority of sex trafficking victims in the United States are in fact American-born. Many of these victims come from highly vulnerable populations. About 40% of them are children. Many of them report past instances of childhood sexual abuse and trauma, foster care or state care involvement. Many have been involved in our prison systems, struggle with alcohol, drug dependency, homelessness. A notable percentage identify as female or as members of the LGBTQ community, and a majority of them come from racial and ethnic minority groups. In fact, our organization has been very intentional about collecting this data from jurisdictions around the country, disaggregated by factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, and has found that women and youth of color, but especially Black and Indigenous women and girls, tend to be overrepresented among sex trafficking survivors. At the same time, we have found that sex buyers most often tend to be white, middle to upper class men. And so this presents an important lens into not only the power dynamics at play, but the inequalities between these two populations. These facts also make sense when we consider the history of sex trafficking and the sex trade in the United States and its origins in colonization and slavery. And in fact, these institutions and their legacy continue to shape the lives of survivors in many ways. And I know that this is an area where some other nations can potentially relate, as they too are grappling with issues of race and the long-term effects of colonization. Due to these realities and intersecting identities, this population struggles with many barriers to protection and assistance, both because of who they are and because of their involvement in the sex trade. Survivors tell us that they routinely face racialized and gender biases, as well as stigma that inhibit their ability to not only be identified as victims, but also to access vital services, support, and justice. So when we talk about the concept of the perfect or ideal victim and who society believes is worthy or deserving of our support, many times these survivors do not adhere to that perception. Instead, these stereotypes mean that they are often not seen or treated as victims of a crime, but that they're subjected to harsh and sometimes degrading behavior during their experiences in the sex trade. And so survivors tell us about the impact of racialized sexual stereotypes on their daily lives. The concept of adultification of Black and brown girls, or the notion that these children are somehow seen as less innocent, promiscuous, or more knowledgeable about sex than other children. Survivors note to us the different expectations that they are held to from sex buyers and exploiters about acts that they are asked or expected to perform. We also know that these biases impact how victims are perceived and treated by law enforcement systems, the judiciary, healthcare workers. In addition, many countries, despite having protective laws for trafficking survivors, we know that trafficking victims continue to be criminalized, not just for prostitution, but for offenses directly related to their exploitation. So survivors, for example, who seek to cope with the trauma of sexual exploitation using drugs or alcohol, survivors who are forced to recruit or traffic other victims at the direction of their exploiters, or survivors who are forced to protect themselves and take their safety into their own hands when their exploiters or traffickers become violent. All of these can lead to criminalization, which means that survivors are essentially doubly victimized. This also means that they conform even less to that standard of an ideal victim. And so this is a concept we talk about in our work and in our advocacy much more extensively. And we refer to this concept as the abuse to prison pipeline, where survivors of gender-based violence, including sex trafficking, are punished for their victimization instead of getting the support that they need to recover. Of course, we've also seen how the COVID-19 pandemic has unfortunately exacerbated sex trafficking and child sex trafficking in the United States due to many of the collateral consequences of the pandemic, including economic insecurity, housing instability. We've seen marked increases in different forms of trafficking, for example, familial trafficking, as families grow more desperate. This has been incredibly difficult for our systems and professionals to not only detect, but to respond to during the pandemic, where removals from the family are needed and referrals into our state care or child welfare system are required. A lot of that has been put on hold due to the pandemic. Another example is landlord-based sexual exploitation that has disproportionately targeted single mothers, migrant women. And so it's very important for practitioners to be on top of these changing dynamics and trends so that we can better respond to the needs of all victims. And so in terms of what's needed, I think so many of the recommendations in this report are critical. At a minimum, getting more comprehensive data collection, understanding the importance of disaggregating that data by several identifiers such as race, gender, ethnicity, nationality, age, gender identity, sexual orientation. All of these help to give us a sense of not only what's happening and the different trends, but also ultimately help us prevent exploitation from happening. It's absolutely critical that we learn from survivors to uncover the myriad of trafficking scenarios and experiences. For example, we are increasingly hearing about dual victimization, where survivors of labor trafficking are also experiencing sex trafficking or sexual exploitation, or what Jerome very artfully talked about, the fact of the biases that young men and boys experience, right? How their families are reluctant to give them support because of all of the patriarchal tropes that come with the exploitation, the sexual exploitation of young men and boys. And then I think the incredibly important need to have more diversity in positions of power. So having, for example, more women and minorities in law enforcement, in the judiciary, in positions of power, so that we can better respond to the needs of all victims. And so I think I'll stop there, but I look forward to this discussion. I'm very grateful for the research that was done here to help support this issue.
Thanks so much, Yasmin, for those remarks. I took note of your discussion about intersectionality and how that plays into it, and also how those who don't fit the ideal victim often then are not only missed, which Jerome highlighted so well, by essentially identified through luck, right? By somebody in the healthcare system, which it shouldn't be luck. We have to be better than luck. But how then that not only turns to a question of whether they get identified, but then double victimization, which is really heading us quickly in the wrong direction. Thanks so much for also mentioning COVID and how the whole system then is getting even worse, potentially, particularly for those on the margins. Our next speaker is Markéta Hrankova. Markéta is the Director and National Coordinator for Lestrada, Czech Republic. Her experience in the field of human rights spans more than 15 years, with special focus on women's rights and different forms of discrimination. I'm so pleased to welcome her on today's panel and provide insights into heightened vulnerabilities and protection needs of women trafficked in hidden sectors, such as domestic work. And Markéta, I noticed you nodding when Yasmin was talking about double victimization in terms of labor and sexual exploitation. I bet you have something to say on that as well. She's going to suggest ways on how to address the invisibility of victims in certain highly gendered forms of trafficking through policy and practice. So Markéta, it's great to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here, and I hope that I will be able to contribute something to this discussion. There is many topics that could be addressed in here, and I choose to talk about one which is pretty much related to our work, and it's the trafficking for the purpose of forced labor of women, especially in areas that are hardly accessible. Lestrada, as many of other organizations, was created 25 years ago as a feminist and women's rights organization. So the gender aspect of our work was there since the very beginning. But as it was the case of Central Europe, it was more focused on sexual exploitation of women trafficked abroad. During the years, the focus had to change because Lestrada was behind the push of accepting the other forms of trafficking, and as there was no organization working with males, Lestrada actually paradoxically became organization working also with male clientele. But what we saw in the past few years is that actually the male clientele became bigger than the female one for Lestrada, especially since 2018. And we were looking for the reasons because we do not believe that there is less women being trafficked. The problem will be somewhere else. And this is when we realize for the sexual exploitation, and I do not want to go too deep inside, but we made a research on it and tried to map the landscape, and we realized that the sex business as such moved very much outside of any public spaces. So it moved into the private homes, private clubs, and online, which makes accessibility even for the street workers working in the sex business or with sex workers almost impossible. But let's focus on the forced labor. We were looking for the reasons why are we having so little female clients, and we realized something which is not inventing a wheel, but that women are trafficked in areas that are very often less formal or private spaces. You don't find women very often on agriculture in Czech Republic or in construction work. It's more the places that are not publicly accessible, which mean households. It might be wellness centers, private homes, care centers, or care for elderly. It can be both private and in a business, and cleaning services and hospitality services. All this, when we try to see how to get there, we realize that all these places are almost inaccessible for outsiders. So it means that the detection of trafficked women and the identification does not work in the same way as we can do it with the construction work or agriculture or any other big areas where you need a high number of labor force. It was already said here, and I do not want to dwell on it because I think there are bigger experts on this, but the cultural expectation and gender expectations, especially in these fields traditionally assigned to women, are playing also a big role in recruiting, trafficking, and actually the coercion forms that are put on the women. When I'm talking about La Strada Czech Republic clients here, it's mostly migrant women, which is going back to the double vulnerability or triple vulnerability of trafficked women in this case. Also, there is expectations that women will have less resistance, that they will work longer, that they are used to provide care and the household services for long hours without complaints. This is first by the gender roles, but there is also an expectation from the typical culture or the country of origin. We had an example of women being trafficked from the Philippines, where the intervention from the side of official places was very reluctant, because actually to show that these women were trafficked was to show that this image, the image of the Filipino worker who is working 12 hours a day and does not have any private needs when she is in the family, would be actually distorted, and the main export image would go against the selling point, I would say. This is something that we deal with a lot in the moment we actually identify the person who is in exploitative situation or trafficked. The trafficked women themselves are ready to accept much harsher conditions, also first by all these stereotypes and education or raising of them, but also because their families are under high pressure, or they are under high pressure of the families because of the remittances. And I don't think that it's typically just the problem of La Strada Czech Republic. I am pretty sure that this is the case also for other European countries. So especially with a bad migration policy, or with the migration policy that goes more towards the employers than towards the employees, the push for staying in human conditions is very high, because there is a high risk of losing the job, and this means losing the possibility to send money back to the families who are taking very often care of the children of these women. So there are so many factors that are playing against the women being actually able to escape or to exit with some kind of good hope that the situation will be solved in their favor, actually. As a service provider, and this is what the La Strada Czech Republic mainly does, we are dealing with three main issues when talking about trafficked women especially in hidden areas. We had within La Strada International Network and with our partners, we had several projects focusing actually on how to deal with this situation. One was about the migrant women with Germany and Austria, and now we are in the project Hidden at Work, where we are trying to identify ways how to reach out to women in hidden or closed or isolated areas. So one big problem is how to access area where they are trafficked. The answer for this, for us partly, we don't have all the answers, is that we are doing a lot of outreach work, which has to be tailored specifically toward these areas. There are several types of activities that our outreach team is doing when passing the information in 11 languages, or trying to find places like the trash cans. I'm just using an example, where we know that the trash can is something that usually the domestic worker is going to, and not the owner. Sending letters pretending to be coming from the country of origin in the language that only the trafficked person can understand. Training the first contact practitioners like doctors, psychologists, teachers at the primary schools where the women are very often accompanying the children. There are many of these types, but we need to coordinate with many other actors, because actually the regular outreach, as we can see it in the agriculture or construction work, is not feasible in these cases. The use of online platforms is something that we are trying to do since several years. The development of this phenomenon is a plus and a minus in the trafficking of women in the hidden areas. One good thing is the possibility to use the community groups, especially when you are working with culture mediators. And again, I know that it's not just the activity that Czech La Strada is having, that you are actually so-called infiltrating the groups specific for certain communities or certain jobs, and you are trying to detect and inform in these groups. The other problem that we see, and I'm trying to short it because I think I'm running out of my time, is the way, even if we arrive to identify or detect the woman who is trafficked into the closed environment, it's how to prepare an exit, escape, or rescue of this person in a way that it would not endanger either the staff or the trafficked person. Very often the power and relationship dynamics in the place are very different from the regular job. And very often the trafficked women do not want to contact police. It can be from the reason that they do not want the police to come when there are the children that they are taking care of and they are having some relationship to them, or it might be a pure fear of the police not wishing to enter the private place, which is not such an unreasonable fear. Very often the practices of traffickers are used in the forced labor in domestic servitude are very similar to the practices of traffickers in the sex business. So it's a kind of shaming, community shaming, or fear and intimidation, blackmailing of the families, blackmailing of the trafficked women. So the psychological terror and very often freedom of move limitation or physical violence are playing a big role in the preparation of the exit or the rescue. In the moment the woman is out, it does not mean that we are over in the problems that are related to this type of work, because in the protection work that we are doing, very often the criminal procedures in this type of trafficking are very difficult and long-term process. Again, the traffickers and the families or the employers are very well aware of the need of the women to find another work within a short period of time, because the migration policy is set up in this way. They are aware of the fact that if they start to send rumors through the community, the women will be in troubles and problems within their community and with the family back home. They are using blackmail and threats to the family. And last but not least, what we see, and this is, I think, the problem of Czech Republic as being a small country, the translators for some of these languages there are, for example, 2 or 3 of them within the whole Czech Republic. And very often there is some connection through the community towards the employers or towards other people who might be participating in in the crime. So we are looking for different ways how to address the protection needs and the needs to find another work or to voluntarily return back home without endangering and damaging actually for long years ahead the situation of the women. Did I made it in time?
Pretty good to me. So thank you so much, Marketa. It was really, I mean, there were so many interesting things in your intervention that stood out to me. But a couple in particular, I thought that the point about how desperate some of these victims are, that they almost need to acquiesce to the exploitation because of that desperation. But then that acquiescence can be interpreted as consent by people on the outside. It's not that they're consenting to it, it's that they have no reasonable alternative. This is fascinating. And then you mentioned a little bit how policies actually can sometimes exacerbate vulnerabilities, which is really problematic. But on the hidden sectors, this is fascinating and so interesting, because when I've done country visits across the OSCE region, what we've seen time and time again is that labor inspectorates are not empowered to conduct inspections for domestic work. Right? They can inspect the construction industry, the agriculture industry, but they cannot go into private homes and check, which means that it's a whole economic sector that has no scrutiny at all. And this is exactly, I think, what you all have experienced in your research. So really fascinating. Last but not least, we're going to turn to Manfred Buchner. And Manfred works for Menvia. He's also a psychologist, but I first came to know Menvia through my country visit with Austria, and I got a chance to meet with them, and I was really impressed. It's one of the leading organizations in Europe working with men, which is just fantastic, and they've done a lot of great work. They provide protection.
I'm basically seeing everybody, yeah,
and support for men affected by human trafficking. And today we're going to hear from Manfred about the gaps in existing assistance and protection measures provided to trafficked men and boys in the Austrian context. And he's going to help us understand really how to dispel gender stereotypes and misconceptions around this concept of the ideal victim that's been discussed already today, and how to recognize the specific needs of all victims, in particular in non-corresponding sectors. So what I'm talking about here is women and girls in labor exploitation, as we just heard from Marketa, or men and boys in sexual exploitation, areas where it might conflict with notions of the ideal victim and so forth. So Manfred, we're really delighted to have you. The screen is yours.
Yes, thank you for so much praise in advance. I will see if we can meet up to it. But yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, and also thanks a lot to all the interesting sharing in advance that we heard today. Many of what I will say will go in the same direction, and I'm happy to join a little bit about our experience. As you see in the back, it's our logo behind me. Menvia exists now since 2013. And we step by step, slowly, under not easy conditions, also in Austria, we could build up a support service system where we can support affected men with all the necessary, like a comprehensive support system, which I think is important, because as we heard, victims have different needs, and it's important really to address all the needs that we observe when giving support in everyday life. So it means we, like, for example, I'm a psychologist, so our support ranges from psychological work, social work, stabilization, crisis intervention, but also legal advice, legal support. We have a flat, secure accommodation, a shelter, where we can take in men so that they can live there and plan the next steps. And also we can provide with food, with everything that is needed for everyday life, and also support when it comes down to legal resident permits, to access to the health system, to supporting when men make new steps in integration, in finding a new job, in planning what could be a future where the vulnerability for being exploited again is reduced. So we have this comprehensive offer. Actually, as many of us know, we are too few people. We are just full-time 5 people, so it's really a little bit too little. But still, there is we can do some things. Maybe I would just like to start with a few remarks on the gender sensitive approach. A few months ago, I published an article in a German-speaking journal for criminology. Unfortunately, it's only in German language, but if it's helpful, I can also send you the link. Where we discussed the gender-specific needs, or the male socialization. Because as you already mentioned, as a man being victim of violence, being victim of exploitation, it is really in strong contradiction to the stereotypical role model of masculinity. And it is in contradiction with the expectation how a real man has to be. And this, as you already mentioned, leads to really many severe difficulties in realizing that men and boys are affected by violence and exploitation in the real life. Yeah, not like in the ideal idea of masculinity. In the real life, men and boys are affected of many forms of violence and also of exploitation and of human trafficking. And also this makes it difficult to see that violence has dramatic consequences. Economically, physically, socially, concerning health, concerning traumatization, and we cannot see this, especially when we look with this gender stereotypical glasses, yeah, on male victims. So, and these difficulties we can observe as well on the level of affected men themselves, that often they don't see themselves as victims. Because of this, they cannot allow themselves to self-identify as victim. And also the surrounding people, like relatives, friends, supportive people, cannot see the need of the victim. And even, as already mentioned, the professionals, yeah, in social work, in law enforcement, at court, also often cannot see the dimension and the effects that violence and exploitation has on the victims. So that's why I'm very much in favor of your approach to reflect gender stereotypes. For example, just one example, if you know, we supported a young man he was in construction work and he fell down because of working day and night, being hungry. Even after many weeks of exploitation, he fell down from the construction site 5 meters. Yeah. And really, like a wonder he was not heavily damaged. Yeah. But the judge asked this way that it was even more bagatellized. Yeah. He started with the questions. So were the injuries not heavy? Yeah. Like you know, he really didn't address this situation that after weeks of exploitation he fell down. Yeah. And of course it does not coincide. It does not go with the male ideal identity. You would not say, oh, I was so afraid and I was so shocked and everything. Men often have difficulties in saying that, but the judge even doubled it. Yeah. So this is like a small, but we can even see it in the protocol of the trial, how the judge himself asked questions this way. Yeah. That he didn't really feel with. He wasn't really compassionate with this young man. Yeah, it's a very good example for this kind of perception where we see big problems. It was already mentioned that the problem with the ideal victim. I totally agree with that. Talking from our experience, and maybe to mention, last year, 2020, we supported 62 men. And the year before, it was 65 men, potential victims. Yeah, and also we had part of it. We had criminal investigations about 20 men out of this, and also 20 men about we had in our shelter. So it's important that you see, as already said, the diversity. Yeah, no man and no victim and no trafficking situation is the same. Every situation is really different, and the reactions of the men are different, and the vulnerabilities are different. Yeah, and of course, because we are working very close with victims, we can individually see what are the needs, what are the necessities, and then support this way. Yeah? But just to show, there is a big range of reactions. Many men are traumatized or very psychological, also intimidated, feel ashamed, do not speak. Yeah, and again, if you look at with the male socialization patterns, men and boys during socialization learn not to speak when feeling powerless, when feeling intimidated, when feeling ashamed. Yeah, it's like a man does not speak about this. It's what often and still today is learned. Yeah, it is you better as a man be silent, don't talk about it. Yeah, and you kind of do not learn, or you learn not to speak. Yeah. And this is a challenge we have in victim protection to build up relationship, build up trust, that men can somehow talk about this and talk about their experiences. But it's not so easy. Often it's a blockage. And this means that men remain silent, that men are not seen, and they don't get support. Yeah, this is the big challenge when talking about men and boys, as we already heard today. Also, when it comes down to sexual exploitation, because this is a big taboo, that also men are victims of sexual violence and sexual exploitation, which does not correspond with the statistics, because estimatedly, I mean, it ranges very wide, but 5 to 10% of all the men, not trafficked people, of all the men experienced in one way or another sexual harassment or sexual violence. Yeah, so it's really a big number, 5 to 10%, the experts estimate. So the reaction we see range from traumatization, but also, many men are in really bad health situation, are sick, are weak. Last year, we had a man that was exploited in the harvest work. And, after 20 years of exploitation, he was only 40 years old, but he could not walk. He could not carry heavy things. Yeah, so he was like at the verge of invalidity. Yeah. And other men have like accidents, on the working places, like in the construction work, I already said. So they fall down, or they have a heart attack, or other, they use machines and then they cut their hands, and these kind of things we see, and these often are excesses where men come to us. Also, it needs to be mentioned when we talk about the ideal victim, of course, men and women as well, not always are polite or silent or so. So we see men, that, for example, as a reaction to the long exploitation, they drink alcohol. Yeah, it's a typical male reaction. Yeah, you just to forget to somehow. We had one man, he drank 2 bottles of vodka every day. And this leads to more problems, problems of self-control, problems of self-discipline, of the possibility to handle your life. We see men that you take other drugs. It's like a typical somehow male pattern, to deal with traumatization, to take drugs. Also women do it, but this is men somehow tend to search for this kind of destructive patterns. Also some men, men we support, we see like a tendency to see everything through a paranoid lens. like, you know, you have been exploited many years, yeah, and this kind of generalizes, yeah, and everybody's against them. Also, we as men, we are against them. They come to our flat, we support them, but it's you know, it's like a generalized view, everybody is against you. So also this we see, I think this is maybe somehow also fits to the male way of processing violence, yeah. And then often men take much energy in this whole criminal investigation, which is positive, yeah. But somehow, in some cases, the criminal investigations cannot give you back what you've lost, yeah. And then they try to fight. And also, and of course, before court, yeah, then maybe the judge is not is unfriendly, and then the man gets aggressive, and then this doesn't work, yeah. And the judges often don't know how to address this kind of frustration that is of very much understandable, yeah. So these are these kind of challenges that we have. On the other side, it needs to be stated, not every man has these kind of problems. Yeah, we also have, before it was mentioned, Philippines. We had some Philippine truck drivers that were very heavily exploited in whole Europe. They came to our shelter and we went with them to the police. Or also men from other countries that are really have a very good social competence. Yeah, that are very good in communication. There's sometimes we have group in our flats. They have really not saying a good time together, yeah, but they care for each other. One cooks, another plays chess, and they have a really good group identity, yeah, in our flat. Yeah, it's always, you know, the group is always changing. So there is a whole variety how male subjects, of course, react to the violence, yeah, and also the extent of vulnerability they bring to us. So one must not suppose that there is one typical reaction. This is very important, yeah. I'm also often very excited in support how much men can profit from our support in many ways. Of course, also, you know, our support always addresses compensation and getting the money back. And sometimes we can have success on that. Yeah, this is for men and women. It's of course the same in the core of human trafficking. There's exploitation, and often sometimes we can have success on that. Not often and not always, but there are some cases. Just to find an end slowly.
Manfred, I'll just ask you to wrap it up so we can take a few questions too.
Yes. Okay, I can finish for now, and the rest we can discuss in the
Fantastic. Thank you so much for highlighting these cultural dynamics. It was really fascinating listening to how these cultural sort of ways that men and boys are raised then cuts against their self-reporting, cuts against their ability to cope with trauma, is reinforced by cultural stereotypes about men and boys that don't accurately identify the trauma, and it becomes a self-perpetuating situation. This is really fascinating. Thank you so much for that insight. We have a bunch of questions, which I hope we can get to some of them. And so what I'd like to do is start, and I'll try to indicate panelists who I think might have something to say on this, but if others want to say something, that's great too. But I'm going to pose the first question to Yasmin and Marketa, and this is a question from UNODC. What challenges have you identified regarding the application of a gender-sensitive approach in criminal justice proceedings? So, you know, we've talked a lot about prevention, protection. What have you seen in terms of how this is manifested in the criminal justice proceedings? So perhaps Yasmin and then Marketa.
Sure, I think this is an excellent question, and one that we grapple with, certainly in the United States, but I think many of these attitudes could be observed in other nations. Generally speaking, law enforcement and the criminal justice system, including the judiciary, are incredibly patriarchal institutions, right? Not only do we have really biased attitudes towards sexual violence, gender-based violence, whether it's being experienced by men or women, right? For all of the reasons the panelists have highlighted. But particularly when we're looking at survivors of sexual exploitation who are involved in the sex trade, there's an added layer of stigma, judgment. There's almost a sense that these survivors are, unrapeable, right? When they experience sexual assault, when they experience violence, there's a sense that that's part of the job description. So we see very little sympathy for these survivors in law enforcement. Oftentimes that can be observed through the reluctance to take their claims seriously, to proceed with justice proceedings. Sometimes it's observed through inappropriate lines of questioning, re-traumatization. We also see a lot of sexual misconduct and exploitation at the hands of both law enforcement, the judiciary, lawyers. I mean, we've had survivors that we've worked with that have gone all the way to a trial and had a mistrial because the young survivor, and in this case, it was a child victim, recognized the opposing counsel as a former client, right? So we've had lots of issues with this in the criminal justice system. And I think it's a real barrier to getting justice for survivors of gender-based violence, but particularly those who've been sexually exploited in the commercial sex trade for all of the reasons. We know that these individuals oftentimes act as exploiters, act as clients, but then just the patriarchal cultural attitudes, the deeply laden misogyny is a real barrier to justice for survivors, again, whether they're men, women, or children.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. Marketa, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely second to what Jasmine said. The patriarchal system of the judicial the procedures is very, very strongly feelable in Czech Republic, both in both ways. For example, I would add, for example, the male perpetrators are usually seen as the typical perpetrators, but when it's a woman, then it's either they are talking about maybe she being either victim, the bottom or victim transformed into the perpetrator, or then she is seen as a biggest evil ever. There's very rarely there's something in between, but what we see very often is, for example, the male victims in forced criminality. There is absolutely no compassion or empathy. It's from the police and investigators till the judge. One thing that we heard very often lately, and it's not only related to gender, but it's related also to the cultural background and ethnic background, is that why do you complain if you came to work here? You should have expected this. And last thing, because I think that Jasmine said it all, is how we are dealing with the transgender people. Because more and more we are having transgender people or non-binary people, not only in the sex industry, which was quite typical, or it was more seen more often. Now we do have foreign people coming into Czech Republic to work being transgender. And this is a huge challenge for not only for us as La Strada, but also, and we see it for the law enforcement and the judges. For example, just the stupid little thing of respecting the chosen gender is something that we are fighting constantly with. And this is not just by the lack of will, because sometimes even the law enforcement officers are trying to be queer respecting, but it's so unprepared for the situation that even if they respect the chosen gender, then it's almost impossible to respect it during the criminal procedure if the person is coming from a country that does not recognize gender transition. So it means that the person is still having, for example, male. We do have only trans women now, but if the person is having a male passport but is identifying as women, and even the police is trying to work with the person as with women, then in the judicial procedure is almost impossible. And I'm not even starting about all the prejudices towards queer community within the forced labor and within the sexual exploitation. But I think that we could actually start a new webinar on this topic. But I think it's very important to talk about it, as this is something that is valid not only towards the law enforcement and criminal procedure, but I think it's a big issue also for the service providers. How to make tailor-made services for queer community and transgender community.
Thanks so much, Marketa. That's actually a good lead into another question that we got, which I'll pose to Annalise, and then she might pass it along to others of you. But that was, the question was whether the study that we conducted included attention to LGBTQI dimensions. Annalise, can you answer that?
Sure, and thank you for the question. So as I mentioned, our research is evidence-based and survivor-informed. So throughout the surveys and throughout the interviews, this is something that the respondents highlighted. It's an issue that was highlighted many times. And when you read the publication, you will note that in the quotes, this is something that was highlighted, particularly about the exclusion of certain groups who do not fit the ideal victim profile, and that are excluded from the discussion on the CTHB, on combating trafficking in human beings. And the way we approached it in the publication is, of course, our idea of having a comprehensive response and to respond to all victims, and looking at the individual needs, advocating for tailored assistance, and not leaving behind some groups because of the way they did identify themselves. So I invite you to read even the quotes in the publication, which has a very informative, and that is a topic that was raised throughout the research. And maybe Jerome has something, because he contributed to this publication, so I want to give him a chance to also highlight this.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I mean, this is such an important topic, and I think this research really does lend itself to a better understanding and more in-depth research into the needs of the LGBTQI community. Now, as someone who's lost a loved one who was LGBTQI, to the pressure and the violence that comes along with that, I really feel like, we can do so much more. But one of the things that we have to understand is that, especially for victims of human trafficking or LGBTQI, there's such an incredible amount of violence, and that's used as a tool by human traffickers to keep these victims, under control, and keep them constantly, going out there and engaging in this crime, no matter what they try and do. So we have to have that lens to look more at the LGBTQI community, because again, I mean, the violence is unacceptable. I mean, every victim deserves the right to have the love and the healing they deserve. So I think that, we're really pulling back the curtain, so to speak, on this crime and how expansive it is, and the specificity we need to look at when it comes to individual victims. And I'm so thankful to have this research come out, and I just look forward to working together in the future to make sure that all victims are accommodated and recognized, and no one gets left behind.
Thanks, Jerome. And Manfred, I'm going to come to you next, because there was a question about judges, and you mentioned this really interesting story about your interaction with, an observation you made of a judge. And I'll tell you, I had almost an identical conversation with a judge within the OSCE region, who said essentially to me, well, why would we offer services to male victims of labor exploitation? They don't have trauma. And I didn't have enough time to explore all the nuances of that statement, but the question that came from the audience was, have you ever thought about or tried to engage in awareness raising with either the criminal justice sector or judges in particular to try to address the problem you just described?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not so directly. I mean, we have a structure in Austria that we have round tables where we discuss cases, that are finished mostly, because it's not so good to discuss about running cases. But once a year, we meet at the Ministry of Justice, where we reflect together with the Ministry of Justice, judges, state procuracy, police, us, LEFE IBF, who is supporting women, and we discuss about cases. And also there are other roundtables. And this is kind of, I mean, we cannot resolve every problem, but this is kind of fruitful. Yeah, and now I'm a few years already in this victim support field and human trafficking also, and over the years I would state it helps. Yeah, we take argumentations of the state procuracy, why somebody was not found guilty, why a case was closed, and so on. And it's kind of fruitful because we understand also better how judges think, they understand better us. And via this way, indirectly, yeah, we can also deconstruct gender stereotypes. It's not so easy to directly address it. And this special case also, there is another roundtable about labor exploitation in Austria. And I mean, it was good luck, but we could discuss this case together with the judge in front of a big audience. And it was not so easy for him to hear all these critical points. We managed to address diplomatically, but it was very clear that, you know, not everything was fine. Yeah. On the other hand, it's important, you know, judges are independent, and I'm very much in favor of the independence of judges. And of course, they need to decide, not us. Yeah, it's because we are, you know, we are on the party of the victim. But yes, this was a chance. Yeah? And this roundtables instrument, yeah, that we have in Austria is a positive thing. It helps. Yeah, but you know, it's only a small steps with a big problem. Yeah.
Jerome, it looked like you had something to add to that.
You know, I think it's a great question, because one of the things that we see specifically in the US is when we're talking about specifically trafficked males, the juvenile justice system is unfortunately where a lot of male victims end up. And we're just, you know, we have to improve our ability to recognize them through this research and be able to offer them the services they need. But, you know, I've been very, very honored to be able to educate judges, you know, prosecutors and law enforcement globally about male victims and better recognition. But again, we just have to make sure that we have those services, that we have the ability to make sure that they can go in this process and feel confident and feel safe. And one of the things that we can do based on this research is we can begin to give them that longitudinal care that they need. In other words, when one of the problems that we see quite a bit in terms of human trafficking cases is getting victims to testify in court. Now, unless we have their confidence, unless we can give them that support, in other words, have an advocate that sticks with them through that process and give them the services they need throughout the entire court proceedings and after, we're not going to have victims who feel confident in coming to testify. So we've got to make sure that we understand each individual need based on gender, and that we're there to make sure that they are confident they're going to be, you know, engaged with and respected and really just listened to throughout this entire process. So I think, again, we have so much work to do, but I think this paper is such a good start on that. And I hope, you know, again, in the future, that we can see a time when, you know, no one is able to fall through the cracks of the system. Thanks so much, Jerome and Manfred, for your comments on the judges. I just add to that I agree about independence of judges, but I think about it a little bit like domestic violence, you know, 30, 40 years ago, when there wasn't a lot of understanding of the dynamics around domestic violence and why somebody might stay in a situation of violence because of that. And in that case, you know, we had to train judges. We had to raise awareness. And I think you can do that while still respecting independence, because it's really about trying to understand the situation fully so that decisions can be made. And I think we go from there. Yasmin, I'll bring it to you. And then in just a minute, Liliana, we're going to come to you for final remarks. So Yasmin, go ahead.
Sure. And I just wanted to quickly say, in the United States, based on the success of the domestic violence movement and the trainings, we've actually developed a National Judicial Institute where we provide comprehensive training to judges in a variety of settings. So whether they're judges in juvenile court, in our child welfare system, tribal court judges, adult criminal judges, to basically help them identify victims no matter how they appear in their courtrooms. And one of the things that we have found very successful is partnering with judges as faculty. So we've done research to show that judges learn better from other judges. So it's not as effective to just simply have advocates or survivors presenting this information, but we do a team teaching method where we partner with judicial faculty to basically train them on the dynamics, on the trends, on the disparities, what we're seeing, and basically help empower them to be able to look behind the charge, really identify victims in their courtrooms, no matter what door they appear through, and be able to provide, appropriate, individually tailored responses to serve those victims' needs. We have seen, for example, through this training, much more identification of male victims, especially young boys. We even had a tribal judge who was one of our faculty, participants who is now part of our faculty, who later identified his own daughter as having been sex trafficked as a result of attending our program and curriculum. And so I do think there are very effective strategies providing, non-judgmental, comprehensive judicial trainings to help empower the judiciary to take a better role on this issue.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. I think we could go on for quite some time. This is such a rich topic. And as Marketa said, we might have to have several follow-up discussions, but I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank all those who asked questions, really fascinating. But Liliana, I'd love to hear your final thoughts, having listened to this great panel discussion, what you take away from this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Ivan. Thank you, everyone, for this very interesting discussion and for sharing the examples from your experience. And after today, I am firmly convinced that we have to use the OSCE platform on working with the participating states on several dimensions. One very important dimension, which you mentioned several times today, is to invest in judicial professionals to work with victims of trafficking, and also to explain to national states why they should develop programs to invest and to build capacities of the judicial system to respond to such cases. And it was mentioned today, I think, by Manfred, that every case is a specific case and it doesn't repeat another case, and every case should be analyzed, and the judge should understand the specificity and particularity of each case in order to take the right decision for each case. For this, people should be working in the judicial system, should be trained how to act. They are not dealing every day with this issue, and they should be trained how to act. A very important aspect, which is on which participating states, from my point of view, should focus, is enforce the education programs and to develop much more awareness raising campaigns. Information and education will help to prevent the appearance of new cases of trafficking. And also very important is to support national and encourage national governments to develop strong mechanisms for collection of data, and these data should be used in the development of national policies. We have to understand, without evidences will not be the results which we expect. And another, and the last comment which I have, is to encourage also national governments to build strong partnerships with civil society organizations working in these areas, because there are so many services provided by specialized civil society organizations working with people affected by trafficking of human beings. And these organizations are providing services in spaces and to the groups where the state doesn't reach. These partnerships should be encouraged, should be financed, and should be promoted. Thank you again for for this rich discussion and for the work which you have done.
Thank you so much. It's real pleasure for us to have you here as the OSCE Special Representative on Gender. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank all our panelists, Yasmin, Manfred, Jerome, and Marketa, for your great discussion and interventions. Fascinating conversation. We hope that the paper and the research contained within it can help all of us to do better for victims. To try to address practical issues, and we look forward to working with you further on this. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join us on June 14th through the 16th, just in a couple of weeks, for our annual Alliance Conference, which will be 3 days in June. We look forward to welcoming you, and many thanks to all the members of my team for their great work on this project. Have an excellent afternoon and rest of your week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. It was a real honor today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.